We were told to say that my brother died in a car crash. And it was a way to stop people from asking questions. That it was a way to just shut the whole thing down. And also that was a way then that we wouldn't have to deal with our own feelings of guilt, of our own deep grief.
Hey guys, I'm Ashley Dawn Rivard, and you are now Into the Dawn, a provocative podcast that looks at all things taboo, such as suicide, grief, sex, addictions, and more. Each week, I talk with experts who successfully investigate their areas of interest. And if you like what you hear, please remember to subscribe. Jayne Amelia Larson is an actress and a voiceover artist, a creative content producer, and the author of the New York Times bestselling memoir, Driving the Saudis, published by Simon Schuster. When she was a young teen, she lost her eldest brother to suicide. She realized almost 40 years later that she had not dealt with the grief until she started writing her novel, Solving for X, about the painful aftermath of a son's suicide and the shell-shocked family left behind, and his sister's search to make sense of his decision to take his young life. So shame, guilt, isolation, I know are all poignant emotions one feels when they lose somebody to suicide. How did these emotions play into your experience when your brother took his life?
I was a teenager when my brother killed himself, and I'm from a very large family, and I'm at the bottom end. And I didn't understand what had happened, and nobody really explained what had happened, so it was very confusing. My brother killed himself while overseas, so my parents flew to take care of things after his death. Now, I had a suspicion that something had happened a month prior to this. It was before Christmas, and there was a family emergency, and I think my mom or my dad flew to Paris to bring my brother home. But I'm 11 or 12, and I'm hearing little snippets of conversation. My parents are keeping the kids pretty much out of it, but the older kids, especially the ones out of the house, they knew what was going on, because since then we've, of course, have talked about it now. It's over 40 years ago, so we talk about it now a little bit. But after my brother died, and I was very, very close to him, and once he was dead, I kept on replaying the conversations I had in my head with him to see try to remember what I said, what I didn't say, what he said, what that meant, what this meant, who said what when, and then what happened. So he had attempted suicide, and then he was brought home, and then somehow he convinced my parents that he was well enough to go back to France to tidy up his affairs and retrieve things and etc. and come home. And instead what he did is he decided this was his chance to actually make it happen, and he successfully killed himself. Sounds odd to say that word, successfully, but he was successful. My other sister, one of my eldest sisters, there's 5 girls and 5 boys, or there were. I know it's
wow.
There's a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And
from the same parents?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
And actually, that suicide probably marked the demise of my parents' marriage in many ways. It might have failed in any case, but that definitely was the marker. My mom was so grief-stricken that she did not get out of bed for a month or more, months maybe, until one of my other sisters said, "You have other children to take care of." So come on, at least that's the way I remember it.
Mm-hmm.
We've never talked about it. I know that my parents felt extreme guilt. My father really couldn't deal with it. He couldn't process it. He didn't want to talk about it or think about it. My mother, while grieving, still kept pretty much all of us at bay. And we just tried to pretend it didn't happen. And yet I had to go to school, and people wondered what was going on, and there were rumors, I think. And that's actually how I got my first really true childhood friend, who I'm still friendly with. One of my only childhood friends that I am still friendly with. She was a little bit older than me, my friend Helena, and she knew what was going on somehow. I don't know how. And she protected me. She protected me from people prying too much or people asking too much. We were told in my house, remember, this is a long time ago, and I think people are a little bit more forthcoming, but sometimes not. We were told to say that my brother died in a car crash. And it was a way to stop people from asking questions, that it was a way to just shut the whole thing down. And also that was a way then that we wouldn't have to deal with our own feelings of guilt, of our own deep grief, of the confusion that his death left behind for every family member. Interestingly enough, my younger brother, who is he's actually less than 2 years younger than I am, when I talked with him very briefly once about it, because he doesn't want to talk about it, he says, well, I wasn't as close to him as you were. I said, well, yeah, but you were in the same house as I was, so I know you must have experienced the pain that I did from the loss of a family member, of a sibling, even if you say you weren't as close. It is true. I was very, very close to that. He was the eldest in the family. I was very close to that brother. He was the eldest.
How old was he when he took his life?
He was 27 when he died. And he, in a way, I feel he kind of raised me, although if I think of it realistically, he was pretty much out of the house by the time I could, by the time I was 5 or 6 years old. But even so, I remember I felt like he saw me in a way that the other siblings didn't. Now I know that's not true. He just saw me in a different way. But I liked the way that he saw me.
Yeah.
Or at least I remember that I liked the way they saw me. I might be romanticizing that now even. Yeah. But also that brother was really charming. It was his name was Christian. And it was really charming. And he was smart and affable and engaging. And that's how we all remember him.
Do you know why he was suicidal?
I've talked about it a little bit with my sisters. They said something about, because they were his contemporaries. And one of my sisters was in Spain when he killed himself in France. So she actually went to him at his death. So she was there through that part of it. She said that it was because of a failed love affair. But probably the deeper story is that my brother was, if not homosexual, he was for sure bisexual. And at that particular time, that was a particularly difficult lifestyle to choose. And it was one maybe he couldn't choose for himself. Of course, one of the things you're left with as the person behind is that you don't know, because you can't ask why he did it. He didn't leave anything for us as a clue, not really.
Did you come from a strict religious family that saw homosexuality as a sin?
I don't think so.
Okay.
When I look back on it now, but the truth is my mother was raised Catholic, and she was a Catholic while she had 10 children. But then she became disillusioned with the church and she left the church. So I think that was more because she was bred as a Catholic. She was raised as a Catholic, and it was part of her upbringing. But now she's pretty much an atheist. And I was not raised in any way in a religious fashion, because being at the bottom of the family by the time we were born, my parents were just exhausted, and we didn't engage in that. But it could have been that my brother, who I know he went for some years to Catholic school when he was little, it's possible that he felt terrific guilt about this choice that he felt compelled to make or could not make, or was part of him. And there was much less research then, of course, about why people are homosexual, or why they're cisgender, or why they're transgender, or questioning, or queer, or intersex. There's much more study done now than there was not. So I'm sure all those things combined with, he was of an artistic nature. He was a writer, terrific writer, and maybe felt failed that he wasn't doing what he wanted to do.
Right. Do those type of things, like now it's been 40 years, does that play over and over in your head still?
Yes, it does. It does, because whenever as you know, I have been writing a novel about suicide, and so I talk with people more about suicide.
Right.
I force myself to talk to people more about suicide. I research about suicide, and whenever I ask people about their own experiences, almost everybody I know has been touched by it. Everyone I know.
Right.
If not many times touched by it. So it's forced me to think about what I knew then and what I couldn't understand now about why he did what he did, and why people take their own lives, and how it happens. And it's still a great mystery for us, I think. It's still, even if we have a better understanding about depression and about cries for help and about suicide ideation, even if we have a better understanding of it, it's still just a huge, drastic measure to take your own life and shut it down in that way, especially because we don't, or I don't know anybody that really does. We don't know what comes after this.
Right.
And maybe you believe there's something after this, but most people I know, they don't know. Even the people that are very religious, they say, well, I believe that there's an afterlife, but I don't know what that is.
Why do you think so many survivors of those who lost somebody to suicide are reluctant to confide and share in, the self-inflicted incident? Like how you said your family said, say he died in a car crash. Is that just too...
I know, it's just ludicrous, right?
Yeah, I mean, is it, does that still happen to this day?
Yes, I think it absolutely does. And I've talked to people about it. As I've said, I forced myself now to talk about it.
Yeah.
I pretended that my brother didn't kill himself for the longest time. And even people that knew about it and asked me about it, I'd say, I don't want to talk about it. And just shut it down. Even with people I was very intimate with. So
now, was that because of how you were raised or in the environment? Like your parents, I believe you said, didn't say much about it. So like there was this underlying don't speak about it in the home, and that just kind of went with you?
I think that was part of it. It was learned. But I think also is that I realized that if I didn't have to talk about it, I didn't have to think about it. And then I didn't have to feel about it. I didn't have to process my own feelings or try to figure out why people do what they do. And I think that is because I didn't want to feel that pain again. But also, I think there is still now, even to this day, so much shame attached to taking your own life. As you know, the expression commit suicide is not what people try to use now, and because it actually comes from the times when committing suicide was a sin and got you in jail if you didn't successfully kill yourself, because it was a sin against God. And therefore you had committed a sin, a crime, and you were imprisoned. This happened up until, 100 years ago or so. So, and that's because of the church. And
this is still going on. I know I've spoken with people in different cultures and different countries, and they were like, no, suicide's happening, but you will never hear about it.
Never talk about it.
Because it's more public. That, they're showing this person killed themselves. And it's becoming more of a norm. But I think it is. And I believe Japan has one of the highest suicide rates, and they're not talking about it.
The shame. There's great taboo attached to it still. People see suicide as atrocious, as shameful, as unforgivable. All those things that, of course, the person that takes their own life feels that already. They feel like they feel their unworth. They feel their deep depression. They feel that things would be better without their presence, their life in it. So, all that's already there. Why would you want to put it on them again after death?
How do you feel that society's stigmas and misperceptions around suicide impacted your grief or the grief you see of others who are around suicide or experiencing suicide?
It affects all of us in spoken and unspoken ways. I think that if we could speak more about what suicide means for the people left behind, I think that we would have a better understanding of suicide altogether. And I think people that are considering suicide would be able to have a franker discussion with the people who care about them about what they are thinking about doing. If there weren't the stigma, if there weren't the shame attached, if there weren't all of this, all of these problems around it that makes people want to be quiet and suffer in quiet.
Suffering in silence. And then implode. You implode.
Yes, absolutely. And my brother, the first attempt was clearly a reach out for help in some ways. And then he probably went home and felt probably in some ways betrayed by his family. I hate to say that out loud. I think my family would be very upset about that. But I think, excuse me, I think that they didn't know how to deal with it. And if we had known, and I'm not counting the children in this, I'm really talking about my parents and my family's inner circle, that it would have helped my brother. It would have helped him survive. It would have helped him figure out the tools that he needed to survive. And he didn't have that chance.
Yeah, it's I agree with you completely and everything you're saying. And I know with my experience on the suicide line and speaking with people who are contemplating taking their life, who are in like the darkest night of their soul. And I've done a lot of research, I would say, based on speaking with these people. And collectively what I hear is, I can stay safe right now because you're the first person I feel safe and have felt safe to express my feelings. Creating a space for somebody to say, here's my dark and it's okay. You're not broken. This is normal to be feeling these feelings. And it's really an amazing thing to see that, I mean, we all do it in some way. Do you know what I'm saying? It doesn't even have to be suicide. We all have things we feel you can't share with someone, like for the judgment or what will they think of me.
Absolutely.
But like when you do get it out, you know, that like, oh, I feel so much better. Like the cliche, the truth will set you free, right? And it's really angered me and made me like, which is really why I started this podcast, is like I just became so pissed off that all these people are suffering. And trust me, and you probably know, a lot of them aren't calling the suicide line, right?
Right, that's right.
I mean, even though they're seeing, gosh, don't quote me on this, but I remember maybe up to 10,000. This was a few months ago, a month. But if over 1 million people are killing themselves a year, and that's just documented. And like you said, if you're trying to hide it and you don't want to tell the, office, like you're going to put something else on the death certificate if you can.
It's probably exponentially higher than that.
Yeah. And it's like, what if we could just break down these stigmas and these ideas that are so outdated of like, you can't feel this, you can't think this, or be this way. Right? Like that's something I see. I don't want to get religious or anything of what I've noticed with people. Like religion can do really good things for people or it can enslave them in this idea. But like, what if that's not who they are in their soul? You know what I mean? And then
absolutely.
You feel stuck. And I don't know. To me, I'm like suicide. I believe this is a huge put out of, I think it could be eradicated, not maybe completely, but if you can just start creating cultures of like, hey, however you feel, like it's fine. Let's have a conversation.
Right. If you could create the space to talk openly about the pain that you're feeling and get help and get help to treat that pain, things would be much better. And I absolutely agree with you in terms of when we were talking about before about that there is still that people keep it secret. They keep it secret, especially in religious communities or in any home where it's just difficult to talk about mental health issues. It just is.
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah, for everybody.
But you have to. Somebody said this to me, and I thought it was brilliant. I interviewed a guy who was a journalist, and he became a drug addict, and he's clean now. But he was saying, it's about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think those mental health conversations are not the most comfortable to have whatsoever, right? But you have to like almost say to yourself, this is going to be uncomfortable and I'm going to keep doing it. And then it'll just, it won't be at some point.
Right. Yeah. And that was a journey that I had to find. And that's part of the reason why I started writing a book about suicide, even though it's a novel. But it's basically a fictionalized account of my own family story. And when I was working on it in class, there was a terrific writing class that I attended at Santa Monica College. Unfortunately, the professor, Jim Crusoe, is going to retire this year because of all this craziness with COVID. He doesn't want to teach online. And I think but he's run a terrific class for many, many years. And one of the people in the class said, "Oh, you have to read the book by Mariette Hartley." And I was thinking Mariette Hartley, and I couldn't remember at the time who exactly that was. But I looked her up, and she's an actress that I very much recognize from my youth, and still works regularly. And you would recognize her too, and your audience would recognize her as soon as you see her face. You say, "Oh, that's Mariette Hartley," and she pretended that suicide had not happened to her all of her adult life until she did a TV movie about a young boy that killed himself. And all this stuff came roaring up about what happened to her as a young actress in Hollywood, in which her father killed himself in the next room with a gun while she and her mother were having dinner. And she buried that for the next 40 or more years, not unlike what I've done, and then wrote a book about it, and now has become a champion of suicide awareness and talking about suicide and what suicide does to the people left behind, to what suicide means, how it affects families, how it affects generations. And I happened to meet her at a book event, and I just mentioned something. I was there with my book and she was there with hers. And she turned to me and she said, "Oh, you're a survivor." And I was kind of flummoxed for a second because I didn't know what she meant. I thought, well, no, I didn't try to kill myself. And then she explained to me that the term survivor meant that I was a survivor of suicide, in that someone I loved left me behind. and that I had to survive that grief. And I didn't know that expression until that moment. And then she said, "You must come and join me tomorrow. There's a suicide walk." I thought, oh, wow, I don't really want to do that. That's just weird. But I went anyway because it was right near my house. And when I was there, I saw thousands of people that were there to promote suicide awareness, that were walking for the people that they loved who had left them behind. And it was very, very moving for me. And I brought a friend with me, and it was very moving for my friend too. And I would never have known about that if I hadn't decided to say something to her, and then she spoke about suicide to me, and it let me talk about it and think about it, and then start to grieve in a different way than I had ever done before. And then it also helped my own writing, because I realized I had to be frank about what it did to me and what it did to my family. I have not recovered from my brother's death. I don't think I ever will.
Right.
You recover in a way, of course, like the way you recover from someone who dearly loved, who's left you. But the particular pain of suicide, I think, resonates in a very
different way,
dangerous way.
Does that make, have you ever been suicidal because of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I, in a way, it's been in some form an attempt to identify with my brother who I lost, which is so strange. It's upsetting even for me to say it out loud and to think about it. But definitely I have thought of suicide as an option, as a way out, and as a way to connect with my brother. Of course, that's totally unrealistic because how could I ever connect with him?
It's interesting.
What would
that
look like? What could that be? We don't know what happens after. The only thing I'm sure about is if I were to take my own life, my family would really never survive that.
Yeah.
2 in one family. And of course, there are many families where that's true, which I learned at that suicide walk, that it's often transgenerational.
Wow. So what does your grief look like now versus when it immediately happened? I know you said you really didn't process it when you were younger, but have you noticed it's transformed in any way?
It's changed, but it always still hits me by surprise. I'm one of those unlucky people who gets very depressed around my birthday. And people usually think it's because of my age, because I'm getting older. And it's totally not that. And I have to say it over and over again to people. It's not because I'm getting old. I'm not worried about that. I know we all get old.
And you're not old, by the way.
well, there's something that happens at my birthday that makes me miss my brother.
Yeah, I could understand that.
It's like it lands home with me more than ever, always at my birthday. And I've really tried to shake it off and get new patterns, because sometimes it's suppressive and I can feel it coming weeks beforehand, and I get
takes you down.
Super depressed. It takes me down. Then that makes me more depressed, and you get into that vicious cycle. And then I understand I understand a little bit of what it means to want to take your own life, because you just want to put the pain to bed. You want to get rid of it. And as I understand, that's often true for people that want to take their own life. They just want an end to the pain. They want an end to it, to the unrelenting pain. And, it's very strange to be talking about this right now in this particular moment because of COVID, because it's a very traumatic time for many, many people.
Absolutely.
And I thought I was doing okay for months, and now we're into the 4th month of it, right?
Yeah.
Or more.
Yeah.
And it's just wearing me down. It's really wearing me down.
Is it bringing up those old wounds as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I knew I was going to come and talk about this with you here. And I thought, how am I going to handle it afterward? How am I going to prepare myself? How am I going to take care of myself?
Yeah.
Who am I going to reach out to? How, just so I could safeguard my own self. And I'm not thinking about suicide regularly, but I am thinking about death a lot.
Totally. Yeah. I am too, and I haven't lost anyone to suicide. It's really an uncomfortable
Yeah.
I've noticed that. I thought, I don't even know. I've just been really going, oh my God, I think as Americans too, it's in our culture where we, for some reason, we do think we're going to live forever, or we just don't like to think about death.
No,
And
you're right.
this has been a smack in the face.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, something's wrong with me, but it's those intrusive thoughts, right? And I keep thinking of losing loved ones and just literally going through the whole thing. And I'm like, well, why am I, I think it's natural, but
no, it's so uncomfortable.
So uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, I totally feel what you're saying. And I can imagine how bad it must be right now for people who came into this with thoughts of suicide, because it's a very alienating experience the way we're living right now. Yeah. Even if you're living with a loved one or loved ones, or living within a family that's close to each other, is still alienating. You go outside.
Absolutely.
You go outside, people aren't talking to each other. They're not smiling. They're not doing things together. People are afraid of getting sick. They're suspicious. They don't know how to, you can't be close to people you normally would. You can't hug anybody. You can't kiss anybody you're not living with. You don't know how you're going to catch this.
I know.
And I think it makes us all feel particularly vulnerable.
Yeah. Have you found any self-care practices through this time that have helped you move through this fear of death, dying, loss, COVID, everything? Like, what do you do for self-care?
I'll be honest with you. I struggle with that all the time. Yeah. And I'm hoping that your listeners can identify with that. I'm always trying to figure out how to take care of myself better, how to do it. Does it mean to get more sleep? Does it mean to, not have that extra glass of wine, not eat too much sugar, whatever it's going to be.
And then those thoughts make you even crazier, I feel. Right. I'm like, get off of my back.
That's right. Get more exercise, get some more sunlight, or, go swimming. So, I'm constantly thinking about how to safeguard myself, not only right now against COVID, against depression, and against anything that might be deeper than that might sneak in when I'm not vigilant.
Yeah. Did you go to therapy?
I did.
Yeah.
I went through various years of relatively unsuccessful therapy. And that was sometimes kind of successful.
Yeah.
But I'm also like you. I've been searching for I want to say more knowledge about what it means to be of sound mental health. Mm-hmm. And so I do a lot of reading on that. And I'd like to think I've worked through some of my demons, certainly not all of them, but some of them. But as we've said, this COVID thing is like stirring everything up for me in a way that I could never have anticipated 5 months ago. Unfortunately for me as well, my eldest sister, my brother, who was very, very close to my brother as well. And she and he, I think, very much raised me. The truth is, all my older brothers and sisters did. It does take a village when you're in a big family, and it means all the older brothers and sisters. But that eldest sister, she succumbed to cancer just as COVID was blowing up. So we never were able to properly grieve her either. Oh my God,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was unfortunate and untimely. And she's the one person actually who could talk about this, could talk about my brother's death and talk about it freely. But she also she came from a social working background, and she had a lot of years of work done on herself about what suicide means and what it meant for her and what it meant for the rest of my family. And she was the one who really, probably the most in my family, who has been continually vocal about it as an adult. As I said, as I remember it, nobody spoke about it. Yeah. They just spoke about that he died. That was it. And nobody addressed the reasons of his death or how he died. And unfortunately, my brother, he slit his wrists in a warm bath. And it probably took him a very long time to die. It's not a fast way to die. I know now, what are the fast ways to die? You get a gun. And that's one of the most successful ways to die. Slitting of the wrists is a harder, longer, in some ways, I don't want to say more tragic way to die because they're all tragic, but maybe the most prolonged. Maybe you think about what you've done as you're dying, and there's no way to stop it once you're too far gone. I can't imagine that for my brother, and I really hope that didn't happen. But my sister was in Spain. She told me she was the one that went to France when he died, and before my parents got there. And she was with her boyfriend. And she said that her boyfriend cleaned up the bathroom, scraped the blood from the tile and tub or something. And for that, she married him.
Wow.
No,
wow.
She didn't stay married to him. But
she's like, you're the one.
She said that for that, he
Yeah.
was so giving, so supportive, and so good under the circumstances that she married him out of grief.
Wow. I mean, man. So what would you suggest to people who could be listening that they've gone through a loss of a loved one to suicide, but they haven't processed, or, they're just imploding, don't know what to do? What are some tools?
Well, one of the reasons why I'm sorry. One of the reasons why I decided to do this podcast is because I know you need to talk about it.
Yeah.
You need to talk about it. You need to talk about it, not just with a therapist, although that's extremely valuable. You need to talk about it. You need to talk about it with the people who care about you, with the people in your life. People need to know that there is a common bond for all of us, that we have all experienced suicide in some form or another, either very close to us, or our friend's mother, or our former school teacher, or our childhood friend. We all have those stories. And if you can talk about your story, other people can talk about their story. And that also leads then about their own thoughts about suicide, not just their survivor thoughts, but their thoughts about suicide and what it means and how they feel and if they feel bad. Mm-hmm. I know now that maybe for the first time, my partner, who I've been with for 5 years, he's maybe the first person the first man I've been with in a relationship who I've openly talked about suicide with regularly, because I'm talking about my brother. And I'm not just mentioning something and then shutting it out, or mentioning something and shutting it down, or telling him not to talk about it because I can't talk about it. I'm actually talking about it and also letting him talk about it and ask me questions as much as I can stand. But it's a lot, really. I think of it relative to even 15 years ago, because I'm talking about it, I'm able to process the grief in a way that I would never be able to do if I weren't talking about it.
That's beautiful.
And that's also why I've been writing about it, because that's also another form. Some people are going to do a painting about it. Mm-hmm. Some people are going to write a song about it. Mm-hmm. Some people are going to do a podcast about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's all a way to talk about and process grief. Yeah. And grief within ourselves about our own suicide pain or suicide ideation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also our suicide survivor grief.
What would you tell somebody who's listening who may be contemplating suicide, and from the perspective of being the one on the other side?
Oh my gosh, just don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah. I know that sounds so selfish to say. Don't do it. It just leaves such black holes behind. I mean, I can testify to this. Yeah. My whole family can. My extended family can. My grandfather, killed himself. My great aunt killed herself. My brother.
Is it a genetic disposition?
They have recently been observing that. There's been research at Johns Hopkins, which actually Marriott Hartley is the one who mentioned to me. She mentioned this to me, and then I started to look at it myself. Yeah, there may be a suicide gene. They're pretty much determined that.
Interesting.
That it's not just. I used to think that it was something that you just carried in your family lore, like a romantic notion, and I don't mean romantic in a in that way, but in a glorified, simplified way. But no, actually, it's probably more than that. It's a suicide gene that carries through and makes you possibly more predisposed to taking your own life, or at least feeling great depression that might lead to taking your own life. And I was actually talking to a cousin of mine about this, who I really didn't know when I was a child, but I've recently become friendly with as an adult. And in a very, I want to say, morbid way, we one time tracked on the telephone all of our combined family members that have killed themselves in various ways, whether it's via alcoholism or drug use or drunk driving, or whether because they put a gun to their head. And we named 10 or more people. With his help, I realized, oh yeah, you're right, that's really suicide, what she did. That was suicide, you know? I have an aunt who drank herself to death and knew that she was drinking herself to death and left children behind. That's suicide.
Yeah.
Maybe nobody wanted to call it that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's suicide. She knew she knew what she was doing, and she was drinking herself to death. So my message is, find help, talk to somebody, call Dee Dee Hirsch, call your friends, tell them how you feel. Don't hide it. Don't pretend it's not happening. Tell somebody, because somebody will help you, and somebody can help stop you so that you can figure out how to live a happier, more fulfilled life, so that you don't use that as a fallback.
Great. Yeah. This too shall pass, right? That saying.
I think so.
It's hard to remember when you're in the dark.
I absolutely think so. And there have been studies on this as well at Harvard by Matthew Knock, who talks about that there's a fleeting moment when the suicide is actually executed. And if that person can get help in that window of time, they will survive.
Right. Yeah.
And if they don't get help, then they will go through with it, and they will die by suicide. Yeah. And they don't have to.
But you have been taking your pain and your grief and like pushing it, or what's the word I'm looking for? Putting it into art, right? That is a healing process for you. You are working on this novel, Solving X.
Yeah, Solving for X.
Solving for X.
Yeah. And that's actually a fictionalized version of my own family experience. So it's all true and yet not true.
Yeah.
It's one of those and it's been terrific for me to write it, because I've been able to process a lot of my feelings about suicide, and also because it's a novel, I'm able to have an ending that is maybe a little bit more, I want to say, finished than what's been true in my own life. What happens with the young heroine is that her eldest brother kills himself, and she doesn't know why. Nobody knows why, and the whole family wonders why. They wonder why. They also don't want to talk about it. They want to hide it. But she sets out to find out why. She's convinced that he would have told her if he could have, and she thinks that she can find out why. So she sets out on a mission to find out anything she can about why he did what he did. And she finds out a lot. She doesn't find out everything, but she finds out a lot. I realize and this goes back to one of your other questions about the ramifications of suicide for those left behind. And I want to say this in the best way and not make it sound too tragic, because it's not. I don't feel that way about it. But in the process of writing the book, I realized that if I had addressed my own grief and addressed my brother's suicide earlier in my life would have worked out differently and probably for the better. It made it difficult for me to get close to people, to be truly intimate with people. I put people at bay. It might not have appeared that way, but that is exactly what I did. And I didn't really realize that it was, I should say, I never realized that it was probably directly related to my brother's suicide. It hit me hard. It stayed with me. I was at a very impressionable age. I was a young teenager or tween. And I never got very far away from it. Never. Not until I started writing about it. And really digging deep. And I used to cry and cry when I was writing. Just, it was hard to get out a sentence sometimes. But then I got to the other side of it, where now I'm sitting in front of you in a podcast talking about it. I could never have done this 5 years ago. And I'm only able to do it because I've been trying to connect with other people who either have wanted to kill themselves or because they've experienced survivor guilt or have been the survivors.
That sounds like a great book, honestly.
Well,
very interesting.
I'm really hoping that it is. I'm just finishing it now. I'm going to be trying to sell it.
Good.
I have some trusted readers who've said it's great, and I hope it's not just nice words. But what's important about the book, I think, from a reading point of view, is that it addresses these issues full out.
Thank you so much for sharing everything and for coming and just opening up, because you, as you said, by you opening up, you give an opening to somebody else who might be suffering in silence.
And I want to thank you, Ashley, for the work that you do, the work that you do in suicide prevention awareness, to talk about these mental health issues that talking about it can change people's lives. And I'm sure you're doing that. So thank you.
That's it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. Please let me know what you think. Leave a comment, share, and we'll be back next week with a new episode.